séance. Bienvenue à...
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 47 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages, the best committee on the Hill. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 30th, 2022, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact the use of French in the Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act and to make related amendments to other acts. As per our routine motion, I would like to inform the committee that all members have completed the required login tests prior to the meeting. Today, we are resuming our clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-13. I would like to welcome our officials from the Departments of Canadian Heritage, Citizenship and Immigration, and the Treasury Board Secretariat, who are here to support the committee on technical matters. Welcome to Julie Boyen, Assistant Deputy Minister, Official Languages, Heritage and Regions; Jean Marleau, Director, Modernization of the Official Languages Act; Chantal Terrien, Manager, Modernization of Official Languages Act; and from the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, Alain Desruisseaux, Directeur Général, Francophone Immigration and Policy, Official Languages Division; Treasury Board Secretariat, Carsten Queld, Executive Director, Official Languages Center of Excellence, People and Culture, Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer. Thank you to all of you for being here. We are resuming where we left off on Tuesday. We were at Amendment Lib 4 when we adjourned. So the floor is to Mr. Housefather. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And dear colleagues, there are some people here that were not here, so I'll start to resume to summarize my arguments, but I'll do it as quickly as possible. Today's committee has a choice. We are at the start of the decision-making for C-13. We have two things we can do. We can continue to have a vision of official languages in Canada that is in line with the vision at the outset of the Act in the 1970s. We have a minority Francophone community outside of Quebec that needs to be supported. We need to support French throughout the country, but there is also an Anglophone community that is a minority in Quebec, and that community needs support as well. Or we can adopt a new vision. This is the Bloc's vision, that the English minority in Quebec is not a minority because it's part of the Canadian English majority. That there is no duty for the federal government to support the Anglophone community in Quebec, and that we should grant everything that Quebec wants. There are amendments throughout this Act that seek to eliminate the federal government's duty to support the vitality and development of the Anglophone communities in Quebec and to apply the stipulations of Quebec's French language charter. And that is one vision. It's a legitimate vision, but it is the Bloc's vision.
Any other political party in Canada historically. The Conservative Party has always supported the vitality and development of the English-speaking minority in Quebec. In fact, Brian Mulroney, in the Charlottetown Accord in 1992, proposed to make that part of the Constitution of Canada. We've always believed that all linguistic minority communities need to be supported. And so here we come to a reference in the bill that needs to be removed. It's a reference to Quebec's Charter of the French Language, which is now Law 96, a law that was adopted using the notwithstanding clause preemptively to deprive Quebecers of their right to go to court and to have the court order a remedy if their charter rights are violated. Remember, the notwithstanding clause is there to say that there's a right, and Section 1, which says that all rights are limited to what's reasonable in a free and democratic society, doesn't apply. You can't check to see if your right was violated and if the way it was done was done in a way that was fair in a free and democratic society. It basically overrides these rights. And nobody ever, when the Constitution was being written, the Charter of Rights the Constitution was being repatriated, the Charter of Rights was being added in 1982, saw the notwithstanding clause being used in this way. And recently in Ontario with respect to labor rights, in Quebec with respect to both Bill 21 and Bill 96, the notwithstanding clause was used preemptively, and the New Democratic Party and the Liberal Party, at least, have come out foursquare and against the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause. Here, we would be incorporating federally the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause by referring approvingly, because I would note that the way this sentence works, it's talking approvingly of this law. We would be essentially handicapping the Attorney General when the Attorney General goes to court, as he said he will do in the Bill 21 case, to argue that the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause is not constitutional. The Attorney General of Canada has already stated that when the Supreme Court hears arguments on Bill 21, the Government of Canada will be arguing the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause is not constitutional. However, what we would be doing here is allowing any of those provinces that will come in and try to justify the use of the notwithstanding clause preemptively to say, but Mr. Attorney General, you referred in your own bill approvingly to a law that uses the notwithstanding clause preemptively. And that is not a good thing at all. I would also point out that Law 96 says that in order to receive services in English in Quebec, you need to have access to English schools, thus depriving half of the English-speaking community, or close to it in Quebec, of the right to getting services in English. Dans la loi sur les langues officielles,
in the Official Languages Act, we've always said that the two communities are supposed to be able to have access to services in both languages, regardless of where they are found in the country. Wherever you are in Canada, if you're a Francophone, you have access to French language services from the federal government. This is true in cases where they are an extreme minority, like, for example, in Mr. Lehou's county, there's 1% of Anglophones, and we just want this to be equal. This is not what it says in the French language charter, and it's not what it says in Law 96. So here we have the opportunity to say the same thing. The point of this was to say that French is the official language of Quebec. It wasn't to say anything else. We can say it in a different way. We can say that the National Assembly in Quebec has declared French to be their official language without saying that Law 96 did it. So we can do the same without naming an act that isn't consensual.
That much as it's supported probably by a majority of Quebecers, because I acknowledge a majority of Francophones support Law 96 in all the polls that I've seen, almost the entire English-speaking community in Quebec, well over 95%, does not support it, nor do any English-speaking organizations. Why would we be referring to a law that nobody in the minority community supports? We would never do this if Francophones in Ontario didn't support an Ontario bill. We would never then refer to it approvingly in a federal law. Why are we doing this when the English-speaking minority in Quebec, which is one of the communities we're supposed to be protecting under the Official Languages Act, doesn't agree at all? Not only is there no consensus, there's a complete disagreement with this law. There's no need to mention it. And finally, let me go to the final things. Number one, there's no reference to any other provincial law in this bill. We're not referring to Ontario's Frank Services Act. We're not referring to acts across this country, including New Brunswick, that protect official languages. We're referring to only one province's law. Why are we referring only to one province's law? Also, the way that we would be doing this, we would be approvingly referring to this law no matter what changes are ever made to this law. We would be surrendering as a federal parliament our authority to a provincial legislature to change a law however it wanted at any time, as our officials said, without any control over what they would do. And that is also not a good thing. What message are you giving to the minority community in Quebec that disagrees with this law when the federal parliament simply embraces it and includes it in a federal law when they don't agree with it? And also, I would, again, respectfully say that many of the amendments that are being proposed would cause real legal jeopardy to the English-speaking minority in Quebec. When you apply this bill and you apply it federally, when we're looking and going to the courts to seek redress for our rights, the reference here, in my view, would cause real legal issues in terms of the rights of the English-speaking community of Quebec. Donc, je plaide avec mes collègues.
I plead with my colleagues. This is one of the rare occasions when we speak of official languages that we can really set aside party politics because we're passionate. All Canadians are passionate about official languages. Protecting our languages as minorities for Francophones throughout Canada, but also for Anglophones in Quebec, is a very passionate issue. There's a way to say things. We can say things in two different ways that have the same meaning. Meaning, in one way, we do it in a way that's hurtful, and in one other way, we can say it in such a way as to not hurt anyone. So I'm asking you as colleagues to think about this when you vote on this amendment. You have many colleagues from Quebec around the table. They are passionate about the province. If you give us the opportunity to get this amendment that is so important to us, but also to the community that we're from, we want the chance to be heard as well.
Our Parliament, in the 7 years I've been here, this is perhaps the most important argument that I have ever made in Parliament, because I'm speaking not only about something I'm passionate about, but something my community is really frightened about. I've never had more calls, more emails from any issue than I've had on this one in my riding in Quebec, because my constituents are scared about what the effect would be on them if a provincial bill and law that they entirely disagree with from the English-speaking minority's perspective is put into federal law. So I plead with my colleagues. I hope you will support Lib 4. I think this is the historical vision of all the Federalist parties from 1968 till now. And anyways, I appreciate my colleagues' time. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. House Fathers. I have many people on the list. I've noticed everyone's name. We'll start with Mr. Beaulieu, following Mr. Garneau, and then Ms. Lambropoulos, and then Ms. Ashton. Mr. Beaulieu, you're first. Yes, I'll be quick if I can. It seems that there's a filibustering strategy going on here to delay the debate, to prevent us to be able to apply the Bill 101 on federally regulated businesses. But I will tell you this, for 52 years, federal language laws have been promoting English in Quebec. That's all you need to know. It's French in Quebec that is under threat, not English. It has supported English lobbying groups like Alliance Québec, like how Mr. Housefather was the chair of this group, the president of this group. He was basically pleading against French as the common language. This is the one condition that allows us to include and integrate newcomers in Quebec society. Contrary to what he said, just like Alliance Québec was broadcasting anti-Quebec sentiments and what it continues to do, as we saw last Tuesday, Anglophones in Quebec, as contrary to Francophones in the rest of Canada, have access to English services. They have access to services in every region, as Francophones throughout Canada have very little access to services in French. This is reality. What they are seeking is not the right to have services in English for Anglophones. They're presenting a right that there be English services for newcomers, for allophones, so that they could be anglicized. This is what we're seeing on the ground. There's a linguistic transfer that is very notable. People are moving towards English because with all of the impact of the federal government and the Official Languages Act in Quebec, English institutions are bloated, they're huge, and they are anglicizing allophones, Bill 101 kids, and Francophones in Quebec. So I think, in Montreal, I think it's taken over 50 years for the federal government to stop denying that there's a decline of French in Canada. Then 2 years ago, they finally admitted it, and they admitted through the speech from the throat that the federal government needed to be more responsible and defend and protect French. We see here that our colleague is trying to evacuate the French language charter to undo what the charter has done. It's been weakened in each of its sectors of application through actions from groups that have been funded by the federal government through the Official Languages Act. So for Quebecers, this is not a fear. It is a real battle for survival that's going on right now. The survival of French in the one francophone state where there still is a majority of francophones in Canada and in North America. So I think this is a battle for linguistic diversity in North America. Yes, I think that, there have been good intentions. They said that the Official Languages Act will respect the official languages, the French language charter. But in Quebec, Law 96 that Mr. Housefather is trying to make seem diabolical has just changed the charter a little bit. It's just trying to make sure that newcomers are integrated, that they have access to Francisation, so that the Quebec society can continue to be inclusive, coherent, and this is something that is that French understanding is necessary to achieve. We see people showing the real face of the Liberal Party, a party that defends English in Quebec, that promotes English, and is trying to encourage the minorization of francophones in Quebec. I won't say any more than this, but I would encourage my colleagues strongly. My colleagues on the opposition should reject this proposition, and I think that Quebecers should pay very close attention to this, because if we don't make significant gains now, the federal government will continue to work for English in Quebec completely, and we cannot continue to allow this decline.
Mr. Garneau, you can take the floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
14 years, whenever I've looked at legislation, I have tried to look at it from the point of view of ensuring clarity and logic. And although I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. In engineering, those two qualities in anything that is written are particularly important: clarity and logic. And the way I look at this bill, Bill C-13, the Modernization of the Official Languages Act, is as follows. It has two main purposes. Let's go back to fundamentals. It is to promote the two official languages that exist in this country across the country. And secondly, it is to protect the linguistic rights of minorities, again, across Canada, whether it's the Anglophone rights of Quebecers, who are a minority within Quebec, or the Francophone rights of minorities living outside of Quebec. That is its fundamental purpose. If we look at the Quebec Charter of the French language, this is a provincial charter. It is based on, and it is essentially, Law 96, adopted by the National Assembly. And its focus, of course, is to address language rights within Quebec. So one is federal and one is provincial, and yet that provincial law has been incorporated into a federal law, Bill C-13. I think we owe it to those who will be interpreting Bill C-13 in the future to achieve clarity and logic in the content of this bill. This is fundamentally important. Whether we agree with Law 96 or not is one matter, and I suspect that much of it will be probably settled in the courts. But either way, it is a provincial law that has been put into a federal law That to me is not logical, and it does not make for clarity. It should not be in a federal bill, so that in the future, the Parliament of Canada, when it does have to interpret Bill C-13, will have greater clarity in its interpretation. The proposed amendment, Lib 4, I think, is an elegant way to, yes, recognize that the National Assembly of Quebec has determined that French is the official language within its sphere of jurisdiction, which we fully recognize, but at the same time achieves greater clarity by removing something which should not be in this bill. So I appeal to you as legislators who believe in clarity, and I'm sure who believe in logic, to accept this amendment. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Garneau.
Thank you, Mr. Garneau. Ms. Lambropoulos. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I would like to thank you for allowing me to take the floor today and to be able to talk about this amendment and why I think it's important for my community here in Saint-Laurent and for the minority community in Quebec.
We all accept, everybody knows and is proud of the fact that Quebec is a French-speaking province, that the common language in Quebec is French. That's a fact, a known fact. And whether or not we include lines 5 and 6, that as they are currently written in the bill or not, that is something that is just common knowledge in Quebec. So the way that Mr. Garneau suggested that we do it, I think is great. And I think that it still mentions the fact that French is the official and common language in Quebec. Now, I understand that when this bill was originally drafted, Bill 96 was not yet implemented, was not yet law in Quebec. And so it made sense originally to save the Charter of the French language. But ever since Bill 96 has been implemented and is included in the Charter of the French language, it is no longer acceptable for us to use that language in this bill. And that is because Bill 96 uses the notwithstanding clause. So it's a bill that literally goes against or ignores the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So how can the federal government include in its bill on language something that includes a notwithstanding clause? So for me, that in itself makes it unacceptable to include the language in that in lines 5 and 6. I would like to further say that Bill 96, since its implementation, has had a very negative impact on the English-speaking or the linguistic minority community in Quebec. Already, people have called me to complain at my office. People who don't necessarily know jurisdiction and who they should be calling for these certain things. You know, when my hairdresser gives me a call and says, Emanuela, I live in your riding. I just recently had to go to the doctor's office with my grandmother, because last time she went to her appointment, they refused to serve her in English. And this was somebody that was speaking to her in English before Bill 96 was implemented. But she no longer speaks to her in English because now she's afraid that a complaint may be filed against her if she speaks any language other than French at her workplace. This senior was lucky to have a granddaughter that actually understands French and who can go attend this doctor's appointment with her. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of seniors living in my riding who may not be so lucky and who may not have access to the very basic health services that one would think one should have access to. So this has a really profound impact. Bill 96 has negatively impacted Canadians living in Quebec for a very long, ever since it's been implemented, and it's very real, and it's only been implemented for several months, but already we see what these negative impacts are. And so for the federal government to support or to include this type of language in its bill, I don't see how I'd be able to support that. And let me go back a little bit because there are some new members on this committee, I believe, who have not been there in the past when I was a member on this committee. And so let me just explain a little bit further. I come from the Greek community in Montreal, and the Greek community has, I guess, one of the major waves of immigration came in the 50s and 60s. And back then, I guess before the 90s, school boards were not based on language. They were religious. So if you were not Catholic, you were automatically sent to an English school if you lived in certain parts of Montreal. So when my grandmother arrived from Greece, her daughter was also from Greece, but my father was born here. And he tried to go to the school. He tried to enroll at the school closest to him, around the corner from his house. And it was a French school. And he wasn't allowed to attend. They told him, you're not Catholic, you're Orthodox, you have to go to an English school. So they gave him the address and they told him to go register at the English school. The seniors who are Anglophone, English speaking in Montreal came around that time, whether it was the 50s, 60s, or even earlier. And they didn't have access to sending their kids, a lot of them, at least in the Jewish and the Greek communities, they didn't have access to sending their kids to a French school. They had to send them to an English school. And when you're not working alongside your child, learning the language with them at school, it's very difficult for you yourself to then learn the language. And so a lot of our seniors did not ever have the opportunity to learn French in Quebec, even though they've been here for many years. They didn't have that opportunity. And then the people who did go to English school, such as my father, were then denied learning English in the workplace because learning French in the workplace because les cours de francisation sont offerts seulement.
French lessons are only offered to immigrants and not to people born in Quebec.
Barriers for certain members of the Greek community to ever learn French. But the seniors who never had any opportunities and who also didn't have the right to go to an English school are the ones who don't have any access to English services. And they're at a stage in their lives when they need these services more than anybody and more than they've ever needed in their entire lives. So I feel it's unconscionable to include in this bill the fact that, Quebec's Charter of the French language provides that French is the official language. Absolutely, French is the official language in Quebec. We should say that in this bill, but we should not refer to the Charter of the French language now that Bill 96 is part of the Charter of the French language, because it comes and it attacks way too many of the rights of the English-speaking minority community in Quebec. Merci.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos. Ms. Ashton? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to share some words in French, and then I will speak in English. First, I would like to say that at the NDP, we believe that the decline of the French language is a concern, a serious concern in Canada, and that we have to do everything in our power to tackle this problem. And this is what leads our work here in this committee, but also within this bill. And we think that we must collaborate with Quebec and make sure that we move forward in order to fight this decline, while acknowledging that we must recognize the rights of minority language communities.
Learning is that we have before us a Liberal amendment to change a Liberal bill. right? We have the Liberal government that put forward a bill, a historic bill, supposedly to deal with the decline of French and protect linguistic minorities. And for the last 3 meetings, because we've only had, this is our third, we have constantly heard about how Liberals want to change this bill. So my question is, how did we get to this point? How is it that the Liberal government got to this point that put forward a bill that clearly has some very serious concerns being shared by Liberal members? And I want to acknowledge that I respect those concerns. But how did we get to this point? We have the minister on the record repeatedly over the last 6 months, since June, indicating that this is an excellent bill, and for the longest time indicating that no changes should be made to this bill. None. It was perfect as it was, something that we have disagreed with fundamentally since the beginning. I'm incredulous, frankly, at what the Liberals have been doing up to now on this bill. If this is such a serious concern, which we're hearing it is, how is it that they put forward a bill that includes this language? And now we've had Liberal members, who I respect, are using the tools they have in front of us to spend now a third committee meeting to talk about it, telling us how serious this is. My question is, does the minister agree with you? We've heard for 6 months that this bill is perfect. My question is, does the PMO agree with you? We've heard that this bill is perfect the way it was. And now we're being asked to support an amendment to the government's own bill. To me, this speaks to a larger fundamental question. And again, I respect the challenges that have been raised here with respect to what communities, including communities like mine, the Greek community, and others have faced. But here, to me, the bigger question is, what is the vision of the Liberal Party when it comes to supporting French in Canada, not just in Quebec, but in Canada? What is the vision of the Liberal Party when it comes to truly defending, protecting the rights of linguistic minorities? Because what I see here is no real vision, no real plan, and a lot of political games. That, to me, is concerning. When in 2023, we know we have serious challenges ahead of us, this is what we are dealing with in this committee. And I want to share my concern, particularly with respect to these political games that are in front of us, with the greatest of respect to every member who has expressed serious concern vis-a-vis this amendment and other things in this bill. I respect that, but my question more broadly is, what is the Liberal plan here? And more importantly, my concern that there's no real vision, no real plan, and a lot of reliance on political games. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton, Mr. El-Khoury, then Mr. Beaulieu. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As member of the Parliament, I must protect the rights of all citizens, whatever they are, whether they are in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada. I was touched by what my colleague opposite said when he said, I see the real face of the Liberal MPs. My answer is, the true face is to protect the rights of every Canadian, whether they are within Quebec or outside of Quebec. Personally, I did an SO31 to protect Molière's language, and I called on all my colleagues to do the same. If we acknowledge that the French language is declining, what's the point if we are depriving English-speaking minorities from their rights? I believe that every Canadian has to protect the rights of other citizens, whether it's a linguistic right or another one. Thank you. Mr. Beaulieu, then Mr. Housefather, very quickly, because I think that I see that people are trying to stretch out the time. I find it unacceptable what Ms. Lombropoulos just said, that her grandmother Just a moment, I just got a message saying Ms. Lambropoulos lost her signal. Just a moment. I apologize, Mr. Beaulieu.
Madame Lambropoulos.
Ms. Lambropoulos, can you hear us? I can hear you. I apologize. I don't know what just happened with my computer. Thank you. So the floor is yours, Mr. Beaulieu. What I wanted to say is that it's unacceptable. It's a Quebec bashing to say that English speakers are afraid to speak English because they're going to be arrested by the French language office. That French schooling was forbidden at some point. I went to school with people from other religions. I know people who are older than me who were told that by neighbors. And they went to the principal, and they confirmed that they accept everybody, and they were accepted into the school, and then they didn't send the kids to school. The main factor being that they went towards the majority, which is an English majority in Canada.
Monsieur Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Housefather. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say two things before closing. One, I heard what my colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, said. I would say that we are all Quebecers. Quebecers who are Anglophones and Quebecers who are Francophones, Quebecers who speak neither one of these languages as a first language. There is not one party or one person who can speak for all of Quebec. Quebec, like every society, has people from different points who have different points of view, and we all have the right to express those points of views without being attacked, without being accused of being anti-Quebecer. That is unacceptable.
I appreciate very much what my friend Ms. Ashton said, and I just want to correct a couple of things. The last three meetings, this amendment only came up at the end of the last meeting. The Liberals on the committee for the first couple of meetings were concerned about amendments coming from other parties, namely Conservative and Bloc Québécois amendments that would have reduced the rights of minority language communities. We weren't trying to change the bill. There are two references in the Official Languages Act and the proposed Bill C-13 that include references to the Charter of the French language. The bill was tabled before Law 96 became law and changed the Charter of the French language from what was first adopted in 1977 to what is there now. And the use of the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause was deeply troubling to many, many people, and it caused a change in the position of many people about whether or not it was appropriate to reference that bill or not. And I'm not trying to hold up the committee. I'm only trying to say this is, as you know, very important to the people I represent. And I think it's important to all of our vision of Canada, because the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause is not acceptable. And whether it was right or wrong, however we got here, in the end result, right now we are where we are, and this reference shouldn't be in the bill. And I just plead with my colleague, who I know is incredibly intelligent, to just consider that. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Ms. Lambropoulos. Yes, I would like to say that my comments were not at all intended to speak against people who live in Quebec. Much to the contrary, I only represent Quebecers. I am a Quebecer myself. But there are some things in Law 96 that go against those people's rights. It was necessary for me to say something. The fact that Mr. Beaulieu knows someone who had a neighbor who couldn't go to school in French and that he had to go see the principal, well, I think that's hearsay. My grandparents were not allowed to send their children to French school, so I would like to clarify that point one more time. I would like to say, like my colleague Anthony said, Mr. Housefather, we are all Quebecers. And every day we are there to fight for Quebecers' rights. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos. I see no hands up, so we will move to a vote. Madam Clerk.
4. Monsieur Garneau.
Oui, j'appuie Lib 4.
Monsieur Elkoury. Monsieur Housefather.
Yes, in favor.
Madame Romanado. Oui. Madame Lambropoulos.
J'appuie Lib 4.
Monsieur Gourde.
Contre.
Monsieur Lobb.
Non.
Monsieur Généreux.
Contre.
Monsieur Lehoux.
Contre.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Contre.
Et Madame Ashton.
Contre.
Donc, 5 pour, 6 contre. L'amendement Lib 4 est rejeté. Donc,
The amendments that we've gone through over the last 3 meetings cover Clause 2. So are we voting in favor of Clause 2 as amended?
parfait. Je vois aucune maxi.
I see no one objecting. We now move on to Clause 3. The first amendment is BQ2. Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor. We would like to withdraw BQ2 and replace it with a new proposal that everyone has received. It adds to the clause in question. I will read the whole thing. What we're adding is that Francophone and Anglophone minorities, we want to protect them by considering that they have different needs. The Anglophone community in Quebec has very different needs than Francophone Quebec's, Francophone communities and Acadian communities outside of Quebec. They have basic needs that aren't being met. They don't have enough schools. They don't have access to healthcare in French. Whereas in Quebec, there are Anglophone institutions that are overfunded. There are English services everywhere. And I think what is necessary here is not to reinforce English, which is not at all under threat in Quebec. It's French that's under threat in Quebec. And maybe there are needs to teach more French. We'll see when we get there. But what is clear is that the Anglophone community has very different needs compared to minority French groups outside of Quebec. And we wanted to reflect that the Official Languages Act reflect that. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. So BQ2, as presented in the package, was not proposed as it was. There was a new version. We all have the modified version, the new BQ2. Are there any questions? Does anyone want to speak to this? Ms. Romanado, I want to clarify that this amendment replaces the one that was withdrawn. Is that correct? Thank you. I just wanted to clarify because I had both documents before me. Well, in fact, it's that the first one was never proposed. BQ2 was speaking to the word Anglophone. So now BQ2 modifies page 3 of C13 at page 3. And it's taking into account the fact that they have different needs. Any other questions? We'll move to a vote. Madam Clerk?
Alors, Monsieur Seri,
Pour.
Monsieur El Khoury,
Excusez. Pour.
Monsieur Housefather,
Abstain.
Madame Kayabaga,
Pour.
Monsieur Sanson,
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde, Monsieur Lob, Monsieur Généreux,
Oui.
Monsieur Lehoux,
Oui.
Monsieur Beaulieu
Oui.
et Madame Ashton.
Oui.
OK. Adopté.
Donc, adopté.
It's carried. Moving on. CPC 5. In your amendments package. Mr. Généreux, we are withdrawing CPC 5. So you're not going to move it? Moving on to page 15 of the amendments package, BQ3. Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor. This proposal, one moment, please, let me find my place. Here, we are adding something to Bill C-13. So line 34, line 39 on the English version on page 3. I can quote it if you like, Mr. Beaulieu. Would you like me to do it? Yes, go ahead. Well, what we want to do is to add after English, and that the goal of the Charter of the French language is to protect, strengthen, and promote that language. That is the purpose of the Charter of the French language. It's just to protect French, and that's what we want to recognize in Clause 3. Any questions around the table? Online? Any questions? I'd like to move to a vote on BQ3.
Ah, voilà. Désolé, problème technique. Un instant, s'il te plaît.
Prenez votre temps. Vous avez beaucoup de choses à contrôler.
Take your time. There's a lot of things you need to manage.
On y va.
Okay, we're ready to go.
3. Monsieur Seri,
Contre.
Monsieur El Khoury,
Contre.
Monsieur Housefather,
Contre.
Madame Kayabaga,
Contre.
Monsieur Sanson,
Contre.
Monsieur Gourde, Monsieur Lob,
Yes.
Monsieur Généreux,
Oui.
Monsieur Lehoux,
Oui.
Monsieur Beaulieu et Madame
Page
Ashton.
50. Pour.
OK. Adopté.
6-5,
6-5 pour. Oui.
6 contre 5, donc pour. Adopté.
This one is carried. Mr. Beaulieu, go ahead. I would like to add a second part that speaks to the same clause. I believe you would have received it. Was it distributed? It is being distributed now. We will suspend for a short moment so that everyone can read the document. present it quickly. So we would like to add a point, B.2, that says, ensure the existence of a majority French society in a Quebec where the future of French is assured. And I think this is critical. I think the Official Languages Act needs to respect this. If we don't guarantee the French language in Quebec, there will be no French in the rest of Canada or in North America. I think this is absolutely critical. For those of us who believe in linguistic duality in Canada, that we have two official languages and that we're striving for substantive equality of the two languages, Quebec needs to be able to continue to maintain its francophone demographic weight and to ensure that the future of French is guaranteed. Mr. Garneau, go ahead. Frankly, I think this is absolutely not necessary to include. This is just an additional clause in the bill. It brings nothing other than reassuring the bloc that is just adding things here and there in the bill. Frankly, I don't think this is required for the bill. Mr. Housefather, go ahead.
For the officials. So, again, what are the legal consequences of the adoption of this amendment? How will this affect courts' interpretation of rights?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Housefather. Here, I would like to remind members of this committee that we are in Article 3, which is the object of the Official Languages Act, therefore its goal and intentions. So we are looking at an additional paragraph that would state that we are guaranteeing the existence of a majority French society in Quebec where the future of French is assured. I can say that in this case, it could lead to confusion to really focus on one of the official languages in the object of the legislation for maintaining and promoting both official languages in Canada. So it's a bit asymmetrical in this case to say that the objective of this legislation is to guarantee a majority of French society in Quebec.
Very much. I will be against it. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Anyone online? No? So we'll move to a vote. Madam Clerk?
Contre.
Monsieur El-Khoury?
Contre.
Monsieur Housefather?
Contre.
Madame Kayabaga?
Contre.
Monsieur Sanson?
Contre.
Monsieur Gourde? Monsieur Laube?
Oui.
Monsieur Généreux?
Oui.
Monsieur Lehoux?
Oh.
Monsieur Beaulieu?
Oh.
Madame Ashton?
Pour.
Donc 6 pour, 5 contre.
6 pour, 5 contre, donc adopté.
Carried. So clause 3, as amended, is it adopted? We'll move to a vote. Oh no, it is adopted. This brings us to page 16 of the amendments package, CPC 6. Mr. Généreux, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this moment, we've arrived at the heart of the bill. This is where we can represent the associations throughout the country that are in minority situations in Quebec and elsewhere. Of course, in Quebec, it's Anglophones, but everywhere else, it's Francophones. If you'll allow me, I would like to withdraw CPC 6 and move directly to CPC 7. So CPC 6 is not being moved, so that brings us to CPC 7. You have the floor. Here, I'd like to read the point on Clause 4, that Bill C-13 in Clause 4 be amended A by replacing line 2 on page 4 with the following, 2.11, The Treasury Board is responsible. B, by replacing lines 5 to 7 on page 4 with the following. 2, the Treasury Board shall, in consultation with the other federal departments, coordinate the implementation of this act, including the C, by replacing line 9 on page 4 with the following. The commitments announced on 41.1 to 3 and ensuring the governance of this act. This comes to bring the Treasury Board the responsibility for coordinating the application of the act.
We experienced over the past 50 years, ever since the law exists, issues when it comes to interpretation, even here in Ottawa, to know who is responsible of applying this bill. We had an example recently with the ArriveCAN app. If you're trying to look for responsible, the person can be found. The coordination of the official languages has to be done by a department and then spread out through the country, but it has to be centralized. The Treasury Board has this ability to be able to implement through all departments here in Ottawa and all through Canada the application of the bill in its entirety. I would like to say for my Liberal friends that this was a promise from Ms. Mélanie Joly to give to the Treasury Board the ability to apply this bill through the Treasury Board. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor and Ms. Fortier don't agree and neither do we, because it's the Heritage Department that applies this. What we're doing here is coordinating. What we're talking about here is coordinating the application. So after all the problems here in Ottawa and throughout the country, we are requesting this, but this is not just from us, the Conservative Party, but it's after all the witnesses that we had, and this reflects everything we have heard across Canada, which is a desire to have a pilot on the plane, a captain on the boat, whatever way you want to express it. We need somebody to be responsible of the application of the Official Languages Act. And I would add that in this bill, we are expecting to see a review every 10 years, which wasn't the case in the past. Now, we're expecting a review every 10 years or even every 5 years. So I think that we should give the Treasury Board the ability to demonstrate that this department is able to apply and coordinate the application of the OLA here in Ottawa. I don't know how many stakeholders there are. There are over 200 organizations across the country. They appeared before us, they were very clear, and they said we must have the Treasury Board coordinating the application of this bill. I'm going to stop here. I would like to hear my colleagues, but I would like to ask either Ms. Boillier or Therrien or other witnesses to know what their interpretation regarding this is. What we see even today are all the failures and the difficulty of applying the current bill. So if after all these years we cannot give a role to within the federal apparatus or a responsible person or entity, then we have to change the bill. So I would like to hear what you have to say regarding this. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. We're talking about coordination across the country, and we're trying to figure out who will coordinate the bill. This section tries to officialize the role from the Canadian Heritage Department. Your amendment suggests to give this responsibility to the Treasury Board, which is a cabinet committee. Everything that has to do with the OLA would have to go through a cabinet committee. So you would have to specify if you want to give the responsibility to a minister, which would be the president of the Treasury Board, and the minister supporting the Treasury Board is the Treasury Board Secretariat. So the application of this amendment would have to be corrected unless the will is to give the responsibility to a committee of the cabinet. Can you please repeat what you said? The intention, from what I understand, and from most organizations in Canada want, is that the Treasury Board is responsible, so that the minister of the Treasury Board, not a committee. I want to be very clear. So this is a specificity that has to be mentioned. As it is, this would be a cabinet committee that would be responsible of applying the bill and not the Treasury Board. So how should it be worded? It would have to be worded as follows: the president of the Treasury Board, and maybe elaborate how mandates are differentiated. The Department of Canadian Heritage and the Treasury Board Secretariat have different mandates. Canadian Heritage is responsible of working with communities, of understanding their needs, of administrating funds and managing them. The Treasury Board Secretariat applies policies for other departments. So the goal of the Treasury Board Secretariat is to oversee the other departments. So maybe my colleague from the Treasury Board Secretariat can speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can add some clarifications to this. We should see the Treasury Board as having an internal role within the public service, as oversight over departments when it comes to financing. We are the public service employer. We manage finance, staff, and yes, this includes the official languages, but for internal management. This is an internal role that has no presence across the country, as would be the case for Canadian Heritage with their regional offices, and who are very close to stakeholders and minority communities. There is a partnership, of course, and there is also in C13 a change in order to give the Treasury Board the responsibility to oversee positive applications, but all this is in the oversight of federal entities, rather. We do not manage subsidy management programs. Our role is not adapted to an external role, as my colleague was explaining, which is the case for Canadian Heritage. I would like to give a practical perspective. We were talking about sections 41, 1 to 3, which is the positive application so that we can apply this to in a tangible way. Canadian Heritage will encourage departments, will offer solutions based on what communities are claiming. And they're saying this is a positive measure that you could implement. Canadian Heritage supports federal departments. Then the Treasury Board will take a look and will double-check if positive measures were implemented. I'll try to explain this differently. Let's say I am the captain of a boat, and the boat is not just asking if this was applied. The role of the captain is wider than just double-checking if things were implemented. My perception when it comes to the government apparatus, the Treasury Board says yes or no to all of the expenses across the country. So if they say to everybody, all the French language champions, unilaterally, it's not just to them, but it's across the federal structure. When people say that the French language is suffering, it's not just an image, it's a reality. If you have 10 people in a room and one person speaks French, speaks English, then everybody will speak English, even if it's just for one person. And it's the same thing for the whole government structure. Efforts must be measured and must be implemented, and somebody has to be accountable. I have been in this committee for 8 years, and what we hear is that the way things work does not work. I am in the most French-speaking county in Canada. This is not where the problem is. The problem is in a place like Montreal, where when you have organizations like CFA, and they beg us to make sure that somebody will make sure that the bill is respected, the Treasury Board is the one who should be accountable, not Canadian Heritage. We all know that Canadian Heritage has an important role to play across Canada. They have to make sure that the government delivers. But above it, there should be someone who can make them accountable. The Official Languages Commissioner also said that. It's been years we have been asked to have somebody who's accountable for this. And we are being scolded because we don't perform as well. We need somebody who is at the head of the structure. And we must apply a fundamental change compared to what we've known for the past 50 years. And maybe in 5 or 10 years, we will have the opportunity to review the bill. And if we realize that it's not working because it is a total mess, then we can adapt. Because we are making changes every 5 or 10 years. So I will take the opportunity to say this. When we say that the bill will allow to work based on regulations in order to decide how services will be delivered, I am concerned. Who, how, and why? What will determine what a region with a strong French presence is. There's no criteria within the bill that says that. There's a lot of room for interpretation, and this is dangerous in a sense. What we want to do with the CPC 7 is to make sure that the Treasury Board can oversee everything and that the judge is not the party. There should be something above Canadian heritage to make sure that rules are respected, reviews will be led. This is what we have experienced over the past 50 years, is that Canadian heritage has been the judge and the party. It has nothing to do with what public servants do. I'm not judging this. All we're saying is that we have to do better when it comes to treating official languages, and we have to be proactive when it comes to implementing these measures. And this has nothing to do with partisanship. It's based on what we have heard. And we can give it a try, and then in 5 or 10 years, we can change if it doesn't work. Yes, I would like to start, and then I can let my colleagues speak. You have talked about many things. When it comes to governance, we're trying to strengthen governance. We try to clarify and establish an informal role, but that is role, which is the Minister of Canadian Heritage. And also by strengthening the weight of the Treasury Board and also the authority that belongs to the Official Languages Commissioner. All this is governance. I know that some stakeholders will say that the president of the Treasury Board has a different role compared to what the government gave her. But there's nothing in the law that says that the president of the Treasury Board can tell other people what to do. She works based on the Public Finances Act. When she has to approve a measure, she can check if it was done based on the Official Languages Act and refuse funding. But she cannot have the role that you want her to have. So I will let my colleague tell you what it is that she could do. I think we have a point of order. I did not hear Mr. Généreux ask another question. Are the witnesses not supposed to intervene when they're asked to? I thought that Mr. Généreux was asking a question to the witnesses. I will let Mr. Quell keep going. Thank you. The Treasury Board does not initiate any programs. It oversees government programs and its funding. In C13, in Part 8, that talks about the Treasury Board role, in this part there is an amendment to its role, namely the oversight. It can create policies, it can inform public servants, and the authorities are expanded to give it the responsibility of making sure that positive implementations take place. C13 suggests a new architecture for the OLA, which gives authorities to the Official Languages Commissioner to create some order. So it's important to understand this new architecture with the respective roles of the Treasury Board, Canadian Heritage, and the Official Languages Office. Commissioner.
Thank you very much. There were some hands up. First, Mr. Sampson, then Mr. Seri, then Mr. Beaulieu. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the information that was provided. This is a historic discussion. We are discussing an act that has not been updated since 1988. I often wonder about the fact that it's been 50 years and how much has happened since. I've experienced a lot of things out in the field in these years with the Official Languages Act. At that time and since, there have been challenges. The challenges have been listed and they are very obvious. We have experienced these challenges out in the field. There have been many problems. I've always said that politicians need to make difficult decisions, but they have to make sure it's the right decision to ensure the official language's success in Canada. This is an opportunity for me to do my part. This is why I would like to give notice, advise you that I will be supporting this amendment, but first I'd like to make some few points. I think this amendment is extremely important to ensure that the expertise of the Treasury Board, that it can oversee the departments on this front. I would like to tell you something that might surprise you. A few days ago, I went in to read a senator's text that occurred during the debate on the modernization of the Official Languages Act. I found it very important. I found some of his interventions very interesting, especially with regards to Clause 42, which we're all apprised of, 42, 43, 44. But I would like to read an excerpt from what he said. He spoke to Article 42 that you referred to. Allow me to tell you that personally, I am extremely pessimistic about the expulsion that the Secretary of State could have on such a diluted act. This was back in 1988 that this point was made. He also says the Secretary of State of Canada with other departments should coordinate with each other. As you know, at the central government, there are only 2 or 3 organizations that truly have power to coordinate. Who are the experts? The Treasury Board, the Department of Finance, and the Privy Council. I will predict this. Back in 1988, he predicted what would happen, what me and many Canadians throughout the country experience and continue to experience. What did he predict? He predicted, Mr. Minister, that Article 42 will never grant you the authority to call in departments that are not respecting it, and to tell them in virtue of Article 42 that you have to act in such and such a way to help me in reaching the objectives of the Act. All this article will cause is frustration. I experienced these frustrations as a member of a school board in my riding. This happened to me often. Was a débat out in left field? No. Everyone that came before this committee on this question in the last few years are in agreement that one agency should coordinate, and it should be the Treasury Board. We should also say that our white paper in 2019, if memory serves, said the same thing. For me, Mr. Chair, CPC 7 represents an acceptable compromise. The file will be led by the Treasury Board in consultation with Heritage Canada. Lib 6 indeed says that Canadian Heritage will consult with the Treasury Board. I think we should just reverse it. The Treasury Board is the expert. The Treasury Board has always held this expertise in making sure that the Act would be respected and that its full powers would be implemented in consultation with Canadian Heritage. So for me, it's clear, it's obvious. I'll go further. CPC 7, if you ask me, reinforces the Treasury Board's role, its role of oversight and coordination, while maintaining the important role of Canadian Heritage for the Pan-Canadian strategy. I think here collaboration is important and obvious. As I said, it is similar to CPC 6, but does the opposite and ensures that this file will be managed by the expert hands of the Treasury Board. And therefore, I would like to say that I am in favor of this amendment, CPC 7, and of course Lib 6. Together, these two amendments speak to the frustrations that were raised by Mr. Desbanés and the issues that we've been experiencing since 1988, and that all of the organizations support this. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to say this. We have the opportunity today to make sure, like my colleague said, we can revise this in 5 years if there's an issue. And I will tell you one thing. We have lived with this problem for 50 years. Let's solve it. We won't have another opportunity. Or maybe someone else will do what we were not able to do in 5 years. So I ask you to support CPC 7. Thank you, Mr. Sanson. Now I have Mr. Serré, Mr. Beaulieu after. Mr. Serré, go ahead. Thank you to everyone who spoke on this. We agree with everything that was said about the Treasury Board, the various players. We spoke to Lib 6. I would like to present a motion, a sub-amendment, to clarify this because it will enrich the conversation of what was brought up by Mr. Généreux and Mr. Sanson. Before I continue, Mr. Chair, I would like the clerk to send the sub-amendment to all committee members, and then perhaps we can take a minute or two and continue, because we want to make sure that the Treasury Board has more power. When we look at the joint resources between the Treasury Board and Heritage Canada, of course, the Treasury Board would be in charge of implementation. The Treasury Board doesn't have the tools for the implementation of the commitments for official languages throughout the country. So the sub-amendment that I'm proposing, you'll have it soon, will clarify this part to underscore the important coordination role of the Treasury Board, and will also the interpreter regrets, but the sound from this participant is insufficient quality for interpretation.
Le texte du sous-amendement avant de continuer, Monsieur le Président. Laissez-moi savoir.
Juste avant qu'on suspende, parce qu'on va...
Before we take a break, because we do want to read this text, Mr. Serré, Ms. Ashton Please forgive me, I forgot to mention that in presenting CP7, if it is carried, NDP 2 on page 18 will not be able to be tabled because of a line conflict. I forgot to mention it. This is specifically for Ms. Ashton. If CPC7 is adopted as is, NDP 2 cannot be adopted. So we will suspend quickly to consider the sub-amendment to CPC 7. Will you come back to me, Mr. Chair? Yes. Mr. Serré, I see you. Ms. Ashton, have we lost you? Ms. Ashton. Ms. Kayabaga, you're there? The sub-amendment by Mr. Serré, I will let you go. We've taken note of it. We have the paper version, so please go ahead. The interpreter regrets, but the sound quality doesn't allow for quality or safe interpretation. We will resume shortly.
D'ajouter un peu une clarification. Évidemment, CPC 7 parle de, le conseil des 6 ministres, la surveillance, les fonds publics. Alors, c'est juste de vraiment, corriger un peu le tir administratif au niveau de la machinerie gouvernementale. Alors, on est tous à la même page. Alors, on veut tous avoir plus de pouvoir. Alors, le changement que j'aimerais juste faire certain que c'est clair, à la page 4, ligne 7, 2.12, on enlève suscite et encourage, puis on indique il coordonne en consultation avec le Conseil du Trésor. Alors, c'est important au niveau pour le patrimoine. Ensuite, on enlève la coordination de la mise en œuvre de la présente loi, notamment la mise en œuvre des engagements énoncés au paragraphe 41, 1 à 3. Puis aussi, après la ligne 10, dans le projet de loi, la page 4, numéro 3, il est attendu qu'il exerce l'obligation prévue au paragraphe 2 en collaboration avec les autres ministres fédéraux. Puis ensuite, le paragraphe C, on va l'enlever, le buffet, pour faire certain que c'est clair, parce que CPC7, plus ou moins, enlève tout rôle au patrimoine, mais il y a quand même un rôle à jouer, mais le Conseil du Trésor, c'est là qu'il a le pouvoir. Alors, je pense que ça l'aide ici à clarifier, puis je pense que ça rencontre les objectifs que M. Généreux, Darrell a mentionné, les intervenants ont mentionné. Alors, je vais arrêter là, voir s'il y a d'autres conversations, M. le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Commentaires sur...
Comments on the sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Seri? No one on the screen or here? Mr. Sanson, go ahead. I would just say that there's no doubt that this amendment improves where we're at compared to 1988, but CPC 7 takes it further. So it's really about how far we want to take things. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Mr. Beaulieu? I don't want to dilute this proposal. For francophones outside of Quebec, it is essential that the Treasury Board creates an executive power that can implement and oversee the implementation of the Official Languages Act to make sure that they have access to French language services outside of Quebec. I will vote against this sub-amendment and vote in favor of CPC 7. Mr. Seri, the interpreter regrets, but the sound quality from this participant is insufficient for quality and safe interpretation.
J'ai fait tantôt avec M. Généreux, M. Sanson. Est-ce que je peux demander à Mme Boyer de peut-être clarifier, parce que c'est un peu les commentaires qu'elle avait fait au début pour clarifier les commentaires de M. Généreux. Est-ce que Mme Boyer, vous pouvez enrichir sur le mécanisme du gouvernement pour expliquer un peu le raisonnement ici de ces 6 amendements?
Mme Boyer, à vous la parole.
You have the floor, Ms. Boyer. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I will answer the question. I think it meets the mandate that we've received at Canadian Heritage and at the Treasury Board. So this amendment would work with the government apparatus. Would Mr. Quell like to add something? No? We'll move to a vote. Mr. Seri, you still have your hand up? No? Excellent. We'll move to a vote, Madam Clerk.
Oui.
Écoutez, je tiens à préciser, vote.
We are voting on
the amendment proposed by Mr. Seri. So on the sub-amendment.
Oui.
Monsieur El Khoury.
Oui.
Mr. Housefather.
Yes.
Madame Kaya Baga.
Oui.
Monsieur Sanson.
Non.
Monsieur Gourde.
Contre.
Monsieur Lobb.
Non.
Monsieur Généreux.
Non.
Monsieur Lehoux.
Non.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Contre.
Madame Ashton.
Non.
Donc, 6 contre, 4 pour, donc c'est rejeté. Le sous-amendement est rejeté.
The sub-amendment is rejected. Going back to CPC 7. And let's proceed to the vote.
Donc, CPC 7, Monsieur Serré.
Monsieur Serré.
Non.
Monsieur El-Khoury.
No.
Monsieur Housefather.
No.
Madame Kayabaga.
Contre.
Monsieur Sanson.
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde.
Pour.
Monsieur Laub.
Yes.
Monsieur Généreux.
Oui.
Monsieur Lehoux.
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Oui.
Madame Ashton.
Oui.
6 yeas, 4 nays, carried. This takes us, we have another 15 minutes. Apologies, 7 yeas, 4 nays. CPC 7 is carried. NDP 2. We have to go over NDP 2 because there's a conflict with lines, so we're moving to Lib 6. If Lib 6 is proposed, then Lib 7 cannot be proposed because there's a conflict. And if Lib 6 is carried, then NDP 3 cannot be suggested because of a line conflict. So NDP 3 at page 23 cannot be proposed because of a line conflict. So Lib 6. Is anyone proposing Lib 6? Mr. Serré? Can we suspend for a few minutes, please? Thank you. Of course. Yes, we are resuming where we left. Lib 6. It's the same as Lib 7 and NDP 3. We're trying to make explicit different roles within in the Treasury Board, the Canadian Heritage, but also expliciting the government structure while preserving the responsibility that would come to only one department. So the Minister of Canadian Heritage shall, in consultation with the President of the Treasury Board, This would be our amendment here. Thank you. Questions, Mr. Housefather?
I live 6, but I now need to ask the officials, based on the adoption of the previous amendment, would now Lib 6 conflict with what was in CPC 7 that was just adopted to create confusion in any way in the Act? Because it seems to me that the CPC amendment put the Treasury Board responsible for certain things. So could you?
Well, with the amendment, previous amendment passed, it would make the Treasury Board responsible for overseeing the implementation of the legislation. And in this amendment, it proposes that Canadian Heritage retain a role of coordinating the pan-government strategy, which is Le Plan d'Action for official languages and usually developed through consultations with stakeholders. So it's a different role. I'll leave it at that.
Creates confusion now. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Merci, merci pour le.
Thank you for updating us. Mr. Généreux, you have the floor. I agree with this. We are ready to vote. Oh, I thought you wanted to say something. Anyone else? Mr. Beaulieu? Just a quick question. We just said in CPC 7 that the Treasury Board has to coordinate in consultation with other departments. And then in Lib 6, it said that the Minister of the Canadian Heritage shall, in consultation with the President of the Treasury Board, so the Treasury Board would develop, the Canadian Heritage would develop the strategy and the Treasury Board would be charged of the oversight. Yes. Other comments? We can proceed to the vote. Go ahead, Mrs. Clark.
En faveur.
Monsieur El-Khoury?
Pour.
Monsieur Housefather?
Pour.
Madame Kayabaga?
Pour.
Monsieur Sanson?
Pour.
Monsieur Gould?
Pour.
Monsieur Lobb?
Pour.
Monsieur Généreux?
Pour.
Monsieur Lehoux?
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu?
Pour.
Madame Ashton?
Unanimously, we can carry Lib 6. Now Lib 7. Just a moment.
Merci, Madame Émilie.
Thank you. Of course, I had said previously that Lib 6 and Lib 7 were the same thing. So this brings to an end amendments to Section 4. Is Section 4 carried as amended? Yes. Carried. Is Section 5 carried? Yes. This takes us to the following amendments relating to Clause 6, CPC 8. We're at page 22 of our amendment package. Mr. Généreux, CPC 8. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clause 6, page 5, in C13. We would like to modify after line 8. Communication means any form of communication, including oral, written, electronic, or virtual communications. Publication means any form of publication, regardless of the medium, including printed, electronic, or virtual publications. Service means any form of service provided or made available, including oral, written, electronic, or virtual services. It doesn't change the bill, just it just clarifies the terminology. Other comments? So we can proceed to the vote. Mr. Chair, I apologize. Could we slightly modify because the English version is not the same as the French one. If you look at the second paragraph, publication, the French version indicates that it can be paper, electronic, virtual, or other. And in English, we only limit it to printed.
Publications. Alors,
So I would like that we can add or other in English as it is in French. Thank you. It would apply to publication and service. Are you suggesting a sub-amendment? Mr. Chairman, this would also apply to service. Yes, that's exactly what I said. Are you proposing a sub-amendment? Yes, please. I think that both languages should say the same. Give me a second, please.
OK. Allez-y, Monsieur Serre.
Go ahead, Mr. Serre. Please read the text as you would like it to be in English so that it reflects the French version. I just want the English to be the same as French.
Form of communication, including oral, written, electronic, or virtual communication, or other. La même chose, le deuxième paragraphe. Publication means of any form of publication, regardless of the medium, including printed, electronic, virtual publication, or other. Ensuite, le troisième paragraphe. Services means any form of services provided or made available, including oral, written, electronic, virtual services, or other.
Là-dessus, j'ai Monsieur Housefather.
Mr. Housefather would like to add something. I can help him because I am an English speaker. I think that what Mr. Serre would like to say is as follows.
Oral, written, electronic, virtual, or other communications. Publication means any form of publication, regardless of the medium, including printed, electronic, virtual, or other publications. A service means any form of service provided or made available, including oral, written, electronic, virtual, or other services.
It would be the exact same as the French version if we worded it this way. Is that what you meant to say, Mr. Serre? It's an extremely minor change. Mr. Housefather, I think that if we could ask you for the interpretation, if you could say the same thing but slower. All we need to do for the clerk is that on the third line, remove or
before communications, and the same on each of the other sentences.
Mr. Chair, it's almost 1:45, and I must leave. Can we have 1 minute to vote on the sub-amendment on CPC 8? Does everybody agree with the sub-amendment that was suggested? Nobody seems to object. Thank you, Mr. Gould. There are obligations for other members, and we will come back on CPC 8 as amended.
Thank you.